On this lovely October afternoon, I sat at the back of my house with my watercolor paints and did some plein air painting. I started out with a sketch done in pencil and then solidified and sorted out some details using a red pen. I don't normally do the red pen thing. I would normally use my pencil for this to make darker lines and create more detail, and an eraser to remove a lot of that excess pen. But this red pen was something that I had at the time that I thought would make for quicker detailing and make it stand out a little bit more so I could organize my drawing a bit better. Painting outside is not something I do super often because the area I live in is often very windy, which dries my acrylics out a lot faster. I used watercolor for this because my portable watercolor set is easier to carry around than my several jars of acrylic paint. One thing I quickly remembered is that watercolor is much thinner than acrylic, so the pencil and red pen I just laid down won't be covered easily. I started at around 3 p.m, so I was fighting against time here to get this piece done before it got too dark and cold to sit out there, so I was working fast and focused on getting as much done with the sketch as I possibly could. I started with the greens as they make up most of the piece, and then worked into the browns, yellows, oranges, and then finally the reds. I then started putting in the larger details, laying on the layers of paint until it felt full and alive. I felt there was more to do, but a lot of the smaller details could not be done with watercolor as it was too thin and my brush too thick, so I called it a day around 5:30 p.m. Using a small brush, I added those tiny details with acrylic paint as it's thicker and will show up against the background a lot easier, and also painted the sky a bit to cover up the pencil and red pen still left over a little bit more. I didn't mind it showing through, but I definitely wanted to subdue it just a little bit so that it wasn't so stark against the paint and it didn't look so messy at the top. I then added some more definition with a black ballpoint pen to finish the piece. I made sure to keep it light and sketchy so it still felt like a sketch as originally intended. It's actually one of the 2022 pieces I like the best, and I'm looking forward to painting a bit more spontaneously more often in the future. This episode is a very artsy one. This week's activity is another painting, but this time more polished and personal. This week's activity fell on what would have been Shorty's 20th birthday, so I thought I'd tackle the one activity that was specifically about her from season 1 that I didn't get a chance to do before she passed: paint a portrait of her. Shorty was the subject of many art pieces over the 19 years we spent together, but I hadn't painted a block of her before, so I figured now was as good a time as any. I originally planned on a much larger, more complicated piece for this activity in 2021, but I've tabled that for a future project and decided to go with something smaller and easier to do in a shorter amount of time. This one took me a few days total. Day 1 was putting down the base colors and starting some of the detail work, like the stitches in the purple crocheted blanket and Shorty's fur that I'm just gonna paint on over later anyway, and adding in the facial features. On day 2, I didn't film anything, but I basically finished the details for the crocheted blanket and sketched in the design on the bedding so I could paint in the stitching later, which I did on day 3. After painting in the stitching, which was incredibly tedious, I then went back in with white to thin the lines out a little and fix up some mistakes and cover up the remaining pencil lines. I went in with a thinned out gray to add shadows and create some depth to the bedding before going back in again with more white to add in some highlights. I also went back in with a brighter yellow to create a little bit of highlights on some of the stitching. The final day was spent finishing Shorty herself. Doing the details of her fur took ages, and it was a lot of going in and out over the same areas with different shades of brown, black, and gray until I had it how I wanted it. It's pretty boring stuff, so I won't show you too much of it. Then it was on to the facial features. Eyes are a really important part as they really carry a lot of expression and life in them. They are the window to the soul, so it's important to have them looking realistic and full of life. once the block was signed and officially completed, I needed to decide where to put it. I liked it on my shelf like this, but ultimately I decided to place it on my dresser. It had more room, but also this is where Shorty spent her last few days of her life. She was obsessed with this spot, so it felt like it made sense in a way.
Hi, enjoying your box? It's like your little castle or something. I thought your little cat tower was your castle, but you don't go on that anymore.
While filming this shot, I noticed something behind the block. It was fur? Every now and again, even almost a year later, I'm still finding bits of her hair in or around this dresser and other areas she spent the most time, but it was funny and a heartwarming coincidence to find it here. I don't know about you, but I usually don't really believe in coincidence, so I can't help but think that it's a sign of some kind. Maybe that's just me being silly, but it made me happy. I was feeling a little nostalgic and also incredibly exhausted, so I decided to sit down and watch a show from when I was a kid. Malcolm in the Middle is a show I remembered quite fondly, but just like most things from your childhood, the things you thought were great often end up being crap when you take a look at them from your adult perspective, now with higher standards and expectations.
You wanna know what the best thing about childhood is? At some point it stops. Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. Can you repeat the question? If not possibly now, life is unfair.
I'm happy to say this show held up pretty well, albeit a few questionable language choices and some fairly outdated jokes.
You listen to me, young man. That one lunch obviously meant a lot to Stevie. He's a human being with human feelings. Now you are going to be friends with that crippled boy and you're going to like it. Understood?
Yes, ma'am. Understood.
Most of which went over my head as a kid anyway. I can confirm the show is still quite funny, if not actually more so as an adult, because now not only can I relate to the older characters in a way I couldn't before, so there's more situations I can laugh at, I now also get a lot of the jokes in them that I didn't get as a kid.
I don't take my legs for granted, Mom.
I know, honey. You're a good boy. Stop playing with yourself.
One thing I did realize was their mother is straight up toxic. Like seriously, actually, the whole family is, really, to the point that some things actually weren't funny and I couldn't even laugh at them because it was actually sort of sad. But again, adult perspective here.
Hey, guy. Was into a bar. And he...
The show really is a product of its time in a lot of ways, so a lot of the jokes that were considered acceptable at the time and depictions of certain family situations that were considered okay to poke fun at or were considered almost relatable is almost like a time capsule of the kind of thing that was considered socially acceptable to put on TV. And as jarring as it is in some cases, some of it still is sort of funny in a dark humor sort of way. Maybe that's just because I grew up with it. Maybe that's just my generation's humor at this point. I really don't know. Although there were some things that left me jaw-dropped that I just could not laugh at, I really did have a good time watching it. I got up to episode 12 before calling it a night. One of the upsides to living in the countryside is your ability to see the stars really well on even fairly clear nights. Tonight was one of those clear sky nights where you can see thousands of stars if you have even most of your lights off, so that's exactly what we're doing. Stargazing. I made myself a hot chocolate and sat on the front porch and spent some time just looking up at the stars and taking in the sound of the night. Yeah, it was a busy night, apparently. We have coyotes in the area that come up pretty close to our house, laughing like hyenas and generally being a nuisance to everything alive, so I didn't want to sit out in the dark for too long by myself, but I did my best to turn off as many lights as I could, inside and out, to make sure I'd get as good of a view of the stars as possible, both in person and on camera. Unfortunately, I didn't take into account the lack of decent nighttime filming ability my iPhone 12 has, so a lot of the footage of me looking at the stars or the sky is just black, with only the brightest stars showing up at all. I think this was a planet, but don't ask me which because I don't know. I also don't know why I don't have any footage of the moon, despite this being a pretty clear enough night that it should have been out, but this was October, and I'm editing this in February, so maybe I'm remembering this in night being clearer than it actually was. Point is, the stars aren't super visible, so I'm gonna overlay this with some star graphics so you get the idea of what my view looked like in person. It was pretty chilly out, and my drink cooled down faster than I could drink it, so that was also another bummer. I called it a night after about a half hour and went to bed.
Hey there. So for today's activity, we're gonna be doing a Rubik's Cube. And I've actually don't think I've ever done one before. I know that sounds weird, but I don't think we ever owned one. And then I don't think I knew anybody that did. So I knew what they were, I just don't remember actually ever doing them. But anyway, I got my dad to mix it up for me so that I don't know how it's done, and I'm gonna try to see how far I can get within the next hour. And I'm gonna be honest, I'm not looking forward to it. Oh, I'm getting somewhere quickly, although I'm totally gonna jinx myself, and before I know it that'll change real quick. I almost have the whole green side actually. I know that like the thing that sucks with Rubik's cubes is that once you like do them, once like you could get one side like completely done and then the next thing you know, shit, it's like all your hard work was, I don't even know what I'm talking, I don't even know what the fuck I'm even saying because I'm so distracted and I'm thinking so hard about this. Okay, I just have these two spots on this side. Not that oh, that's what I was saying, because even if you get the whole entirety of one side done, you still have the other sides to do, and then you're gonna have to get that one mixed up in order to get those right. Okay. So I just have this one then. If I can even just get the green done in one go, that would be cool. Shit. How do I... How can I get it to be on the same as these ones? I think that's the question I need to be asking myself. Yeah! I couldn't get the green. I almost had it a few times. There was quite a few times where it was only like one left and I just couldn't get it. Yeah, I got one side. It took me maybe about an hour. I'm kind of worried that if I try to do the other sides, I'm gonna mess it up. I don't know how to word what I want to say here, but like while I was doing it, it was like I was kind of getting the idea of like how best to, at least how to get the one side done, how to twist things and place things so that they end up where they're supposed to be. But I feel like just doing it just that one way, I would have to know how to get all the sides in a very specific way so that they can all be connected and put into place properly. Like it would require like a lot of thought and a lot of planning and a lot of like knowing where exactly everything should be in order to make it happen, and I just don't have it. I think I'm satisfied with just getting the one side done. I don't feel the need to do the other sides today. But yeah, that was it for today's activity, and I will see you in the next episode.
That's it for episode 7. If you're enjoying this vlog-based series and would like to keep up with it, feel free to subscribe. See you in episode 8.